Thank you to Joe and Edelman for giving me the opportunity to talk to this well-informed audience about trust in British-Irish relations and about the issue of Britain and Europe. For most of the 20th century, and the centenary of the Easter Rising this year gives us plenty of opportunity to think back over the last 100 years, relations between Britain and Ireland could not be said to be characterized by a high degree of mutual trust. The Rising, the War of Independence, the Civil War, the Economic War of the 1930s, Ireland's neutrality during the Second World War, to name but 5 episodes, which all may each have been justified in themselves, and I'll leave that for historians to debate. But I don't think this is controversial. Individually and in aggregate, such developments did not generally promote good relations and trust across these islands. The Provisional IRA's armed campaign in Northern Ireland in the 70s, 80s, and start of the 90s, and the British government's response to it caused at times further friction in our relations. For those of us who like anniversaries, and I confess to being one such, yesterday was the 44th anniversary of the burning down of the British Embassy in Merrion Square by an angry mob, outraged by the Bloody Sunday shootings in Derry, Londonderry a few days earlier. Yet, we've gone from those dark days, characterized by wariness and sometimes hostility, to our present era of friendship and mutual respect, where our two governments are cooperating across the waterfront of issues wherever it's in our common interest to do so. As the Taoiseach and Mr. Cameron were able to declare in March 2012, the relationship between our two countries has never been stronger or more settled, as complex or as important as it is today. What brought about this change? You can point to, as Spike says in the film Notting Hill, a combination of factors. Firstly, that's my tribute to the Welsh team coming here on Sunday. Firstly, there are a myriad of people-to-people links which have constituted a network of connections between us, even when government relations were poor and the news invariably grim. These human links of kith and kin are the product of migration between these islands, flows of people in both directions across the Irish Sea, which have been happening over the centuries. Some of the most trusted people are people like us, whom we know well. So there have been hundreds of thousands of advocates for better relations in both countries, people who knew at first hand that the other place wasn't so bad. And just on those numbers, we reckon that now there are about 500,000 Irish citizens resident in Great Britain, and in addition, that about another 5 million Brits have or had an Irish-born grandparent, which means, if you do the maths, there are more people living in Great Britain with the right to an Irish passport than live in the Republic. To quote Mr. Kenny and Mr. Cameron again, our citizens, uniquely linked by geography and history, are connected today as never before through business, politics, culture and sport, travel and technology, and of course, family ties. These vital human links are nowhere more evident than in the presence of a large, confident, valued and integrated Irish community in Britain, and in the increasing number of British people who now live and work in Ireland. These links always existed, but celebrating them was not always easy. We've been remembering the great life of Sir Terry Wogan this week, and one of his huge contributions to British-Irish relations was to be a much-loved and trusted Irish voice in British homes at a time when IRA terrorism was a daily reality in the United Kingdom. In these peaceful times, thank goodness, the Brits no longer need a national treasure like Terry Wogan to be reminded of how much we enjoy the company of our Irish neighbours, which doesn't mean we're about to give you back Graham Norton. I was very amused, by the way, during the state visit of President Higgins to the UK in 2014, when at the Callura variety concert at the Royal Albert Hall, Olivia O'Leary told the mostly Irish audience, amid scenes of general celebration and joy, that it's official. It's okay now to like the English. In some ways it was a funny remark, but in other ways it was a moment of catharsis. A second factor that has brought our two countries and administrations together has been our common membership of the European Union. At an important psychological level, our status as sovereign nation-states, subject to the same rules and regulations, participating in the same European institutions on an equal basis, has made our relationship much more balanced. The UK's size and weight are constrained in a good way by the EU's framework of structures, processes, and regulations. And smaller member states across Europe enjoy a voice at the table and a significant influence over developments, as well as the support of institutions like the Commission to safeguard their interests. In short, being in the European Union gives greater confidence in Ireland and in Britain that the relationship between us will be better channeled and better managed. Just as importantly, our both being members of the European Union has meant that ministers and officials over the years since we joined together in 1973 have formed the habit of working with each other on European questions, speaking the same language, having a similar sense of humour, coming from a shared culture, and often adopting a similar liberal, free market, business-friendly approach to issues. The British and Irish find comparing notes and working together in Europe comes naturally. Our administrations are no longer strangers to one another, as we were before we joined the European Union. On the contrary, we have become close friends and allies in Europe, like-minded on many of the big order questions, such as improving the EU's competitiveness, extending the single market to cover services, digital retail, and promoting trade agreements with other countries and regions of the world. A third factor has been our willingness to put aside the baggage of history and work together to bring peace in Northern Ireland. It was often hard-pounding in the 1980s and the early 1990s, but even in those years, Dublin and London managed to reach important agreements. Margaret Thatcher and Garret Fitzgerald signed the Anglo-Irish Agreement in 1985. John Major and Albert Reynolds made the landmark Downing Street Declaration in 1993, which paved the way for the first ceasefires. But it was the work of Tony Blair and Bertie Ahern and their teams that achieved the breakthrough, of course, of the Good Friday Agreement in 1998. The experience of bringing peace to Northern Ireland forced our two governments to pull together, to concert tactics, and to work in tandem for the same outcome, and that really built trust and confidence between them. The ending of the dreadful drumbeat of violence in Northern Ireland also made a huge difference, of course. Cleansed of violence, the political environment was ready for a major change of public sentiment. But there still needed to be a catalyst, and that catalyst, as we all know, proved to be the two recent state visits. The Queen's visit here, nearly 5 years ago now, in May 2011, and President Higgins's return state visit in April 2014, enabled the leaders of our countries to signal to our peoples through their words, their actions, and the evident enjoyment of each other's company, how we should view one another, with respect and friendship, and that we shouldn't allow our contested history to inhibit our naturally friendly relations. As Professor McAleese, then President of Ireland, of course, said at as the Queen's hostess at the banquet in Dublin Castle, we can't change the past, but we have decided to change the future. Now, it'd be a mistake to take this much happier state of affairs in British-Irish relations for granted. International relations, like stocks and shares, can go down as well as up. Trust hard won can be lost. We need to continue our close cooperation on Northern Ireland in a spirit of compromise and openness. We need to maintain the momentum of our programme of bilateral collaboration, which we initiated in the wake of the Queen's visit in 2012. By the way, that programme encourages all departments in our two administrations to work with their counterparts on the other side of the Irish Sea on issues where working together will promote the common good across these islands. Twice a year we take stock of progress. Secretaries General meet every autumn, while the Taoiseach and the Prime Minister hold a summit in the first half of each year. Neither Britain nor Ireland has a structured programme of bilateral cooperation of this scale and intensity with any other country, and it will be important that we continue it. Equally, I believe it's very helpful for both our countries to be members of the same international organisations where possible. And an immediate challenge to this general rule of thumb comes from the UK's referendum on Europe. In some ways, trust lies at the heart of the European issue in the United Kingdom. Who do we trust to make the laws that govern us? Who do we trust to enforce them fairly? Who do we trust to keep us safe from the dangers of the modern world, from disease, climate change, unwanted immigration, the threats to our economy from out-of-control institutions, from terrorism, and so on? Philip Stevens, the British commentator, writing in the Financial Times last month, quoted President Roosevelt's Secretary of State in 1944, who said that the British would always be uncomfortable in any club that they did not lead. As he also pointed out, history, geography, political culture, and self-image all help to explain why Britain takes a different view of Europe than many other member states. Europe is not existentially important for the United Kingdom as it is for most others. For the original 6 member states, the deep fear of another major European conflict fought over their territory means that faith in the European project as the guarantor of peace is almost unshakable. For Spain, Portugal, and Greece, the European Union has been their salvation from and safeguard against the return of a fascist past. For the Central Europeans, the European Union protects their young democracies and prevents them falling back towards command economies and one-party politics, and helps to keep Russia's baleful influence away. For Ireland, if I may say so, European Union membership has been key to the country's modernisation and remains important for a mature, balanced relationship with Britain. But the European Union does not have the same existential importance for Britain. Our political institutions survived the 2 world wars and emerged, if anything, stronger for having been tested in the fire of global conflict. We were never occupied, so our fear of another European conflict is less visceral. The European Union didn't modernise us, it doesn't guarantee our democracy, and if anything, it slightly dilutes it. Going further back, for most of Britain's recent history, we did our best to avoid getting entangled in the affairs of the continent so that we could get on with trading and building and maintaining an empire. So an arm's length approach to the politics of Europe is to some extent in our national DNA. So in Britain, I think you do find an inherent exceptionalism. The EU has to prove itself on more prosaic grounds. Is it providing greater opportunities for business? What benefits do individuals get from membership? And the pros and cons appear these days more in balance to many British people without an overriding need to belong to the European Union. Another aspect of trust in this debate is that the British people feel for too long that successive British governments have not trusted them to have a direct say over our position in Europe, unlike in Ireland. The UK last had a referendum on our membership of the European Union, or the then EEC as it was, in 1975. And of course, the organisation has changed hugely since that time. Tony Blair promised a referendum on the European Constitution. It was expected to be held in 2006, but after the no votes in France and the Netherlands, the referendum was dropped. So there's a feeling in the UK that a referendum on our membership has been promised, didn't happen, and is overdue. And moreover, of course, there is a lot of disquiet about developments in Europe. On immigration, an issue which resonates most on the doorstep, but probably merits a little explanation, net migration to the United Kingdom in the year to June 2015 was 330,000 people, an all-time record and over 3 times the government's target. Now, not all those people are European Union citizens, of course, but a great many are. 180,000 people, European Union citizens, were net migrants into the UK in the 12 months, and that figure is rising. Now, none of this is to deny that the vast majority of migrants work hard and pay taxes, but there's a rate of immigration above which a society cannot readily absorb all the new people joining it. And many of those immigrants receive in-work tax benefits to supplement their salaries, which puts pressure on our welfare system. And meanwhile, Europe's not standing still. It seems clear that those member states that have adopted the euro, in order to improve the functioning of the currency, will need to integrate farther and faster than those outside the eurozone. So the UK's qualms about our European Union membership risk being exacerbated by our being drawn into further centralising steps for which there's little support in the UK and whose purpose, in some aspects, is to bolster a currency which we are not part of. So that's the political challenge that David Cameron faces on Europe, and he's decided to address it by seeking reforms in the European Union which should benefit all EU member states, and by negotiating or renegotiating the EU status and taking this package of changes to a referendum in the UK in order to have our European Union membership reaffirmed. So the aim is to keep the United Kingdom inside a reformed European Union. Now, we're looking for reform in 4 areas. There's a lot of this today, of course, in the newspapers and the media generally, so you may be familiar with these 4 areas, and I'll mention them only briefly. Sovereignty and subsidiarity. We want to remove the UK from the objective of an ever closer union, and we want to give a bigger role to national parliaments to ensure laws are made at the appropriate level, at the national level wherever possible, at the European level only where necessary. Economic governance. The European Union should recognise the reality that it is, for the foreseeable future, a multi-currency zone, and currencies or countries outside the Eurozone should not be disadvantaged or lose influence in policy areas like the single market because they have not adopted the euro. Third area, competitiveness. We want to reduce the regulatory burden, particularly on small and medium-sized enterprises, extend the single market, supercharge negotiations for trade deals with the United States and others. And fourthly, and the area that has attracted the most controversy, migration. We want to crack down on abuse. That's not very controversial. But we also want to be able to change our welfare system so that it does not become, as it has been, an artificial draw for people to come to Britain to be able to claim from day one the in-work tax benefits that enable them to take work at lower salaries than they might otherwise do. Progress to date? Well, things are moving very fast, as you will have seen. We have adopted our EU referendum law in the UK, which means there must be a referendum before the end of 2017. The government is making it clear that this is a one-shot referendum. There'll be no second chance. So unlike in Ireland, where you've had a couple of referendums, where you've needed them, in the UK, we're going to have our second referendums to begin with. Negotiations, they're going well in Brussels. You saw yesterday that Donald Tusk, the President of the European Council, has circulated a set of draft texts which, if agreed by the other member states, will constitute the deal that we are seeking. Our goal is to reach that deal, if possible, at the European Council on the 18th and 19th of February, but getting the substance right, of course, is more important than the timing. In Davos last month, David Cameron said, "If there isn't a good deal, I'm not in a hurry. I can hold my referendum any time up until the end of 2017. If the deal is done in the course of the next 2 weeks at the February European Council, it is possible that the referendum could be held as early as June." A word on public opinion. It's hard to measure at the moment in the UK, as most people are not thinking about the European Union most of the time. But last month, a poll by Survation recorded a 4-point lead for the Leave campaign over the Remain campaign. And that lead is fairly typical of the opinion polls at the moment. But opinion is soft. The same opinion polls also record that the outcome of our renegotiation would have some impact on how people decided to vote. And about 50% of the people asked say that a package which curbed benefits for EU migrants, reduced red tape for business, and provided safeguards for euro outs would be a good package. So, if the draft deal is acceptable to our 27 partner countries in the EU, and crucially, with the welfare and migration measures retained in it, it feels as if the referendum is very winnable. Finally, a word on the Irish dimension to all this. Those countries which are our closest neighbours and with which we have the richest and most complex relations are likely to be the most affected were Britain ever to leave the European Union. And Ireland is, by almost every measure, at the top of the list of the UK's closest and most important neighbours, and the consequences of a change in Britain's EU status would likely be felt profoundly in Ireland. Various Irish think tanks and commentators say the same, and they have also argued that Northern Ireland could have the most to lose from the UK departing from the European Union. Of course, another aspect of the Irish dimension to the UK question about Europe is the number of Irish people, or people of Irish descent, who will have the right to vote in the referendum. So there are about 1.3 million people in Northern Ireland with a vote. There are several 100,000 Irish citizens resident in Great Britain eligible to vote, to say nothing of the 5 million people of recent Irish descent. The Irish government is making its position of support for the UK to remain in the European Union very clear, while at the same time emphasising that the issue is one for the people of the UK to decide on themselves. And I imagine that people in the UK who have an interest in good relations between the UK and Ireland will be listening carefully to what the Irish government is saying and what other Irish organisations and prominent people are saying. One final thought. I expect many of you will know British nationals who are resident in Ireland, provided they've lived and have been registered on the UK's electoral roll provided they've lived in Britain, and have been registered on the UK's electoral roll in the last 15 years, they have the right to vote in our referendum. So do remind them of this when you next see them. Registration can be done online, and it's pretty quick and easy. The more eligible people who vote in the referendum, the greater the trust we can all have that its result will reflect the settled position of the United Kingdom on the European question. Thank you very much indeed.